Yeah, thanks so much for joining me again this evening. My name is Dele Momodu, and I'm expecting Chairman Mr. HAKEEM BELO-OSAGIE to join me any moment from now. This promises to be one of the best ever. Yes, I'm looking forward to having Mr. HAKEEM BELO-OSAGIE live on Instagram this evening. Okay, I've seen Chairman. Just like birds of a feather, I want you now. All of the people around us, they say, can they be that close? Just let me stay for the record. We're giving love and a family dose. We are family. Living life is fun and we've just begun to get our share of this world's delight. High hopes we have for the future and our goals inside. We know we don't get depressed. Here's what we call our golden rule. Have faith in you and the things you do. You won't go wrong. Oh no, this is our family jewel. We are family. Our family. Oh, Dele from Dubai. Thanks for joining us. I'm waiting for Chairman to connect.
What's the problem? Is it freezing out? Just shall we use another phone? Yeah, let's try. Okay. Let me just...
We need another phone.
Stay connected. Okay. Okay. Let me do it first.
Everyone can see we're together as we walk on by, and we fly just like birds of a feather. I want you now. All of the people around us, they say, can they be that close? Sorry, viewers, we're trying to connect. This can be a complicated process sometimes, so please bear with us. Oh, finally. Yes. I think we have chairman now in the house.
All right.
Good evening, chairman.
My apologies for delaying you. We had trouble with the other phone.
Yes, I realized that, but better late than never. It's good to see you, sir.
Yes, great. I'm very good. And Dele, you're looking good as normal.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
You usually are.
Thank you, sir. And how is my dear sister, Maima?
Very fine indeed. Very, very fine indeed.
My warmest regards to her. Yes, I was playing a song just now. We are family.
Yes.
So I've been a member of your family for some time. And if you remember, that was by Sister Sledge, who you brought Sister Sledge for her birthday in Ghana many years back. I remember that.
You have a very, very good memory. I had a classmate of mine called Alan Heyman. He was my class date. The people playing were Brothers Johnson and Sister Sledge. And so that was our first day out to listen to Sister Sledge play. And that's the reason why when she was celebrating her birthday, I think her 40th birthday, I brought Sister Sledge to Accra to play to remind her of that occasion. And I remember you were there as well, and I think we all celebrated together.
Yes, I even invited them to my house in Accra. I hosted them. And
you did.
They said they asked campaign, they didn't want to go back to America. I said, that's how Nigerians do the thing, you know. You know, spoil people silly. So good to have you. I've said it countless times. You are one of my heroes. You are one man I respect so much. And I want to place it on record publicly again. The worst thing that can happen to anybody is to either be in jail or to be in exile. I experienced both, and you were there with me in exile. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. If I can also add, I also have to place on record the great assistance, the great advice, and the great education you gave me. Soon after my take press of the importance of communications. And if you recall, I was under a lot of attack from the Tribune and Daily Sketch and many other papers like that. And you kindly organized a meeting, which I was very reluctant to go to. You literally took me fighting and kicking. And I went for this meeting in Ibadan, which you organized. And you taught me the importance of being in touch with the press, explaining your point of view. Do not look upon them as an enemy, and you will find that you can develop a good relationship with them. And Nduka Obaigana, and I'm deeply grateful to both of you, and I believe the two of you are very good friends as well.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Chairman. Anything for you, anytime. Thank you, sir. Yes, I would like us to start. You are already 65 years old. At 65, a lot of the young people are not likely to know a lot of the things you've done, not just for Nigeria, but for Africa and globally. Could you tell us a bit about your childhood days, right from birth?
All right. I was born in Lagos to a doctor, a medical doctor, and a nurse. Both my parents are from Benin, but I was born in Lagos. And my father had decided to specialize and become a gynecologist, and my mother wanted to become a sister and a matron. So we were taken to England when I was a very young child of about 3 years of age. And I was living in England with my sister and my brother until I was about 7 years or 8 years of age, when I then came back to Nigeria. And on coming back to Nigeria, I started primary school in Corona School and spent a few years there. I enjoyed myself very much there. In those days, I would describe myself as a very shy and bookish person. I think one of my nicknames was Encyclopedia. Very good friends, in particular Udoma, who many of you would have heard about. People like Benny Okagwe, Sam Kuki, Rotimi Dabiri, Gustavo Beide, Aminu Yesufu. These were my prime defining time of my life. It was boarding school, and I cherish it very much because it was an opportunity for me to meet people who were from all over Nigeria. And I people from the north, Muslims, Christians, and it enabled me to get a sense of the whole country. And it was a very detribalized place. Many of my very good friends come from my days at King's College. I was very active at King's College. I was the head of the Students' Council, so I was constantly complaining or raising motions against the principal of King's College in those days. My first business experience was at King's College, where I was general manager of the Coca-Cola shop. And the person who worked very closely with me was Atidor Peterside. Wow. And our overall boss was Adebayo Ogunlesi, who himself reported to Ikpehai Ahonkai. So when I look back at how all of us have fared, it's very interesting to note the background and how we spent those times. I was very active in the debating society and the quiz team at the school. And of course, I was very active in the school band. I've always had a love for music. And in my younger days, I was actually a vocalist, something that a lot of my friends teased me about. And I would say the high point of our career as members of what we called ourselves the King's College Hotspots was an occasion in which at the school dance, Fela Anikulapo Kuti was invited to play, and he very kindly agreed to give us backing music while us small boys played 3 or 4 songs. My biggest regret in life is that there was no video in those days, because that would have been a video that I would have prized us with Fela in the background. I think I just released Jeon Koku in those days, and it was a hit. So I left King's College in Lower Sixth, and from there went to an international school in South Wales called United World College of the Atlantic, which has students from all over the world, and 2 very, very happy years of my life. And if anything, it just further deepened my view that it's important for people to be tolerant of people wherever they are in university career.
And so where did you start from? Cambridge or Oxford?
All right. I started at Oxford University. I read politics, philosophy, and economics there. I very much enjoyed those subjects. You will not believe it, but my original intention when I was in King's College was actually to do a degree in mathematics. And but I got to make my mark in mathematics, and the teacher suggested to me, don't be discouraged. Maybe you should do something like politics or something like history. You seem to have a strong interest in that area. So I did politics, philosophy, and economics. And my classmates or who were at Oxford with me, again, Udo Udoma, Bayo Ogunlesi, again, were together. Tobo, who became a university professor, and people like Stella Amakris, Carol Cambridge, and did a law degree in Cambridge. And very much enjoyed my time at Cambridge. I must say that I preferred politics and philosophy to law, but I thought that law was important to understand, and I'm very pleased that I did my law because it's been very helpful to me in understanding the legal frameworks of any of the business or political situations I have been in. And after that, I then went to Harvard Business School and did my MBA. Bayo Ogunlesi was at Harvard a year ahead of me. There were not many Africans at Harvard Business School when I was there. I think I was about the only person in my class, but there were some Africans who were at the law school and in other areas. And so there I met, and I had people like Louis Edozian, who was a good friend at that time. Ngozi Edozian had just left Harvard, but was at MIT. So we were in good touch with each other. Chinwe Dike was also there at the time. And it was at Harvard Business School that I met my, after I did my special paper on the international oil markets at Harvard Business School, and I was extremely fortunate that I was able to get a job in Nigeria, special assistant. That was the start of my 6 to 7 years of government work in the oil and gas sector, which I had always had a dream of being in, and I was very, very lucky to be able to get that dream.
Fantastic, fantastic. Growing up, who were your heroes growing up?
Well, my heroes, I would first of all, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the great American political and protest leaders who had such a big impact on us. They were the people I really looked up to. Then I would say I also very much looked up to, at that time, some of the great leaders like were still in jail, still fighting for apartheid, and people like Stephen Biko, who sadly died while he was in detention. And then, of course, I would say Sheikh Abdel Zaki Yamani. He was the Saudi oil minister, a brilliant Harvard Law School educated oil minister who did a lot in ensuring that people in Africa, in the Middle East, that we got more of what we deserve to get out of the oil industry, and was at the center of the negotiations between the oil-producing governments and the oil companies. Going to Nigeria, I have to say that as a young person, one of the people that I would say I very much admired in Nigeria was General Gawan, and I very much was very enamored by this young man who was only 32 or 33 years of age when he became head of government of Nigeria, and had the task of trying to bring the country together, and had the task also of ensuring that after the Civil War, that there were not too many reprisals, and that we all, as a country, came together. In many respects, I think that General Gawan has not been given sufficient credit for his decision to postpone a handover date. But I think that history will be kind to him in the sense that I think his government, in many respects, laid the foundation for Nigerian infrastructure and in peace within the country. And then, of course, as a young man, I very much looked up to some of the great civil servants of those days, Abdulaziz Atta, Alison Ayida, Philip Asiodu, who in those days were very, very strong and powerful civil servants, very highly educated, and who were very much at the forefront of developing a greater Nigeria. So those, I would say, were very much my role models. Then when I started working, obviously you have people who are two in particular stand out. One, Yahaya Diko, who was my boss as petroleum minister. He was an incredible person, very intelligent, very clear mind, extremely hardworking, and a very simple and unassuming person who didn't like the limelight and behaved always with great modesty. And I think he's had a very big impact on me because I very much liked to behave the way he did. He was not showy, he was not noisy, he was not arrogant, he was a very simple person. So he was very much a big mentor to me. And then the second mentor is to me in business. I would say was a very interesting person who sadly died at a very young age. A guy called Aliyu Dasuki, and he was a businessman who had this company called Old Trade, he taught me a lot about the business world. The one thing I will always remember saying of his that he always used to repeat to me was that, Kim, it's always important in life that you think big. You must always think big, because the deal that makes you $100 million, the deal that makes you $1 million, and the deal that makes you 100,000 naira, each of those three deals takes exactly the same length of time to complete. But and naira, or for $1 million, or for $1 million, is exactly the same level of suffering you're going to go through. So if you're going to go through hell, you're going to go through suffering, and you're going to work like mad, make it for something that is large, make it for something that is big, and then it is worth your while to struggle, to sweat, and to suffer, and to enjoy it when you succeed.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Yes, yeah. Before we continue, just along the line of what you said about being humble, and I got a message from a gentleman in the United States earlier today. His name is Ademola. I worked for Etisalat for 5 years before leaving Nigeria. My memory about Chairman HBU still lingers positively till today. As a young man, always going to his office to set up his devices and Madam's devices, BlackBerry, data cards, and other mobile services then. There was never a time I got to Chairman's house that I wasn't offered drinks, food, etc. But of course, being a professional that needs to face his duties, I always turned it down. I would never forget when I informed Madam Mrs. Maima BELO-OSAGIE of my wedding coming up July 28, 2012, after setting up a device this fateful day in the lovely lawned garden. So it is always fully packed of wisdom and knowledge that still helps me till today. His humility and Madam's humility is unbelievable. I am looking forward to listening to Chairman this evening. So I'm sure he's watching.
Well, please, if I can send him my very, very best regards. I trust that he continues to be happily married. I'm delighted to hear, because I continue to remain technically.
Now that he's here, he's watching. Yes. So, also growing up, loads of books. I wanted to be a teacher, so I started more. Really impacted your life.
Yes.
Beyond studies. Beyond what you studied in school, were there books that you would remember as impacting your life?
Oh, definitely. I must say that the books that have influenced me the most have tended to be biographies, and biographies and autobiographies. He wrote a book entitled The Best and the Brightest. And this is it's a book about a lot of very famous Americans. They tried to wrestle with the problem of the Vietnam War and how so many of them failed. What is fascinating about the book is that on one level, it is a book about a very impressive group of people when he tells you what they had done. Like, there's one man he describes called Robert McNamara. He had been a brilliant academic at Harvard Business School. He had worked during the Second World War in the United States effort. He then went into the motor car industry and became president of Ford Motor Company. And so on the one level, this book tells you a lot about people and their motivations and what they had done and not done. But on the other hand, it also tells you how, despite all that collective brilliance, how they made big mistakes and how they failed on the issue of Vietnam. So it had a huge impact on me in the sense of giving you encouragement to do your best and to work in different industries. You don't have to be limited to only one, but at the same time to also remind you that however academically able or intellectually brilliant you think you are, all right, that people far more able and brilliant than yourself have failed in things. And sometimes it's because there are important issues of culture, it's important issues of understanding society that they never grasped and therefore didn't understand. And sometimes it's because they have not listened enough to other people who had certain insights that you did not have or that they did not have themselves. So I think that David Halberstam's Best and the Brightest was a great influence on me. And another book he wrote called The Children, which is a book which talks about the young African Americans who fought for civil rights. They were university students, they were in their 20s, they walked into restaurants to try to have them desegregated. They were beaten up by the police, they were taken to jail, they would come out of jail, they'll go back again segregation. And I think that one
we have an internet issue there. I hope it's also not a phone call. Fortunately, because we are recording, this is more than a master class at Harvard. So we'll try to bring Chairman in again, and then we hope it will be very smooth this time. Rena Tassin, yes, one of the big posters at the Emirates. So whenever I fly Emirates and she's on board, we always have a good time. She takes good care of us. Good evening. It's good to see you. I hear you've resumed your flights to London now from Dubai. So we hope Africa will join soon. Hey, my boss for life, Uncle Mike Awoyinfa. Good evening, sir. That was my boss at the Weekend Concord News thing here. So many people. Steve, Baba Eko, Tokumbo Kuti. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Yes, Chairman.
Good. My apologies. that we got cut off.
Yeah, no,
we got cut off.
We need to centralize your camera, sir. We cannot see your face again.
Yes.
We need to have you right in the center. Yeah. Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. But if there is more light, your face looks a bit darker now. It was brighter before. Yes. If we could have lights focused on you, sir.
Yes. Okay, then. Okay.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yeah. If you centralize your camera, it's still a bit dark, but we can.
So we're talking about the books. So David Halberstam's The Children, and then those made a very big impact on me. And then, of course, there were a whole series of other books, biographies of Charles de Gaulle, called The Edge of the Sword, a huge impact on me. And then, of course, looking at Nelson Mandela's book, where he talks about his own life. I forgot the exact title, but it's his autobiography, and it's a very moving autobiography. The Long Walk to Freedom.
Freedom.
Yes. Oh, yes. I think those are some of the books that have had a very big impact on me.
So were you in tune with the politics of the First Republic in Nigeria?
Was I?
Very
much so. Very, very much so. I was very fortunate because my father was a gynecologist. All right, and he was. There were not that many Muslim gynecologists in Lagos at the time, and so many of the northern politicians ended up being treated by my father as their gynecologist. All right, and therefore he was gynecologist.
We need to center, sir. Sorry, sir.
center.
You are too much at the edge now, at the center.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Shagari, Ribadu, Inuawada, Nuhu Bameli, a lot of the ministers at the time. So I found myself in very much as a young child aware and knowledgeable about First Republic politics. Well, of course, at that age, you all read Azikiwe's speeches because Azikiwe was very much it was president of the country, very learned. He used to make these very great speeches, a supreme command of the English language, and very much the nationalist. And then, of course, one was very well aware of the fact that there was this big regional divide between North, East, and West. And therefore, a lot of that First Republic was the juggling between those, those three centers. There were, as young people, were aware of a lot of the complaints about corruption, though I must say that when you compare what we used to complain about as corruption in those days, it pales into insignificance, all right, when you compare it to what last 5, 10, 15 years. And when you come down to think of what they left behind or what they left their families, you realize that they were in many respects, very selfless leaders. So I can still remember in 1966 when there was the coup d'etat. I was in my very first year in King's College, and we suddenly heard that the Prime Minister was missing, possibly assassinated. There were a lot of officers killed, and no one knew where we were going to go. At the beginning, there was great celebration because everybody thought that the military was going to save us from the corrupt civilians. There was lots of excitement. And then, of course, things began. And there was that very depressing breakdown in relations in the country, massacres that took place in various parts of the country. And then by the time I was in my second year, we started the Civil War. And I must say that Civil War, I'll never forget that Civil War, because we came back from one long vacation, and suddenly, I can still remember the beds of the Eastern region students who went back and didn't come back. And I felt a great sense of sadness that we had degenerated, into civil war. And so for me, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that we must never, ever, ever get to that stage where ethnic hatred or ethnic bitterness is ever so bad that this country has another civil war. Because that period was terrible. I think close to maybe 1 million people lost their lives, either out of starvation or out of the war. And I think we must always be conscious of the fact that many of those people who shouted the most and who in some senses, they spoke the language of war and battle and fight and the rest. Many of them escaped, and it is a lot of innocent people who suffered and who lost their lives following one side or another side.
Yeah, it's surprising that our leaders at that time patronized local hospitals, patronized indigenous doctors like your dad. So what do you think went wrong?
I think a number of things went wrong. Number one, compared the compensation of the Senate or a member of the House earned, or what a doctor earned compared to the CEO of a bank, they were not that different. They were all around the same level. The CEO of a bank didn't make more than, 20% maximum more than a senior specialist. doctor. Over the years, doctors and nurses have been very, very poorly paid. And that has led to a massive exodus to the United States, an exodus to Middle East, exodus to Europe of a lot of our best talents. That's the first problem that has gone wrong. And then the second thing that has happened, I think, is that we have just not been spending wisely and efficiently money on hospitals, on medical training, on outpatients, and on smaller hospitals that could give service to people in the smaller towns and the smaller villages of the country. I mean, I can still remember being on British Airways just a few years ago, and an air hostess came up to me and just asked me if I was Mr. BELO-OSAGIE, and I said, yes, I am. And then she was very excited. She said that she had looked at the manifest and saw my name, and she had called her mother, because she said that she was born in Lagos, Nigeria, at the Island Maternity Hospital at Campbell Street. And she always remembered her mother saying that there was one Professor BELO-OSAGIE who delivered her, and that she had wanted to go back, her mother had wanted to go back to England to have the baby, but her mother said no, she wasn't going to go back because there was this Dr. BELO-OSAGIE, and there was this hospital called Island Maternity that was just as good as a place in England. And then that was my father, and she was very excited. And she looked after me very well throughout the flight. And when I got off the flight, I kind of reflected that, see how far we have come today, that here we are, most Nigerians, a lot of well-to-do Nigerians don't have their children born, or the babies born in Nigeria, let alone an expatriate who had the choice of whether to go to London or to remain in Nigeria. But there was a time at which we had hospitals, and we had outstanding doctors, and we had the equipment sufficient that a person who was a foreigner felt comfortable having their baby in Nigeria. A lot has gone wrong. And I must say that just watching television over the last couple of days, hearing about what has happened in the NDDC, hearing about what has happened in the Northeastern Development Development Commission, it just makes one wonder, well, if money was voted in these commissions ostensibly to do, could have roads, could have water, could have electricity, could compensate them for oil spillage, and so, and you hear, has money in the past been voted for?
You see, for an interview with chairman, we will need about 10 hours. But today, we're trying to get at least 2 hours. So, and time is going very quickly. So, I will touch on the different subjects. Yes. The next one I want to speak about is that, did your education prepare you ideologically? And will it be right to say it prepared you for the world of capitalism?
I would break that question down into three sections, into three questions. When we talk of ideology, I would say that I was very fortunate in that the specific people who taught me politics and philosophy, and those who taught me law, the teachers that I had, the tutors that I had, were tutors who I would say were definitely on the left side of politics. All right? So without a shadow of a doubt, they were people who basically believed that ultimately politics and a functioning economy and laws are judged predominantly by how does it affect the bottom 40% of the population, right? And that if a society cannot be organized such that economic benefits go to that society has failed. And therefore, the societies that are to be respected are those that are able to satisfy them. Certainly in politics and philosophy and in law, did prepare me for thinking about such issues. So that's one. I would also say that business school was very helpful in reminding me that however well-intentioned you may be, there's a need to run organizations efficiently, making, well, at the very least, covering your costs, all right, if not making a reasonable profit. And that a society cannot exist continuously always by subsidies. Now, however much or however famous a university you have gone to, the fact of the matter is that that university is in a society very different from your own. So without a shadow of a doubt, when you do return to your own country, there are many things that you haven't learned, but don't work at home. And therefore, there's a need for you to continue to learn when you come back and not have an attitude that you have all the answers. So my education didn't prepare me for those kinds of issues, but that's the reason why I very much salute a lot of people, Mike Olorunfemi, Igwe Nwokedi in NNPC, who I learned a lot from, Dr. T.M. John, who I learned a lot from, who had built refineries in Nigeria, who had built petrochemical complexes in Nigeria, and who really had a good understanding of how you execute and how you succeed in projects within Nigeria. I still think that we have a fundamental problem in our politics, is that it is still a competition between elites, and elites who are essentially trying to accumulate as much for themselves as possible, and we have to ensure that the driver's son or the farmer's son is able to get a good education, is able to be part and parcel of an economy that assures him of a decent job, whether it's in the manufacturing sector, whether it's in the farming sector, and how we put all of that together in a country that looks more like a South Korea, looks more like a Malaysia, as opposed to where we are today, in which I think there's one statistic that shows that Nigeria probably has more people under the poverty line with. And therefore, when I look at countries that have done extremely well, I very much look towards Korea, I look towards Malaysia, and of course, one has to look towards China, which has done a phenomenal job at lifting something like, I think, 4 to 500 million people out of poverty in the last 20 to 30 years.
Sir, don't you think the problem with Nigeria is that we are trying to practice?
I would say that the problem, I wouldn't say the problem is that we're trying to practice capitalism without capital. I would just say instead that I don't think that capitalism without the regulatory restriction, and I think that yes, capital has its that human needs must stand at the very center of development, and I do very much believe that all societies, all its citizens, certain basic economic rights, whether it is the right to have education, whether it is basic electricity, whether it is water supplies, whether it is 3 square meals a day. And therefore, we need an economic system and need certain facilities to be placed at their disposal. I don't believe in the trickle-down theory. I don't believe that if you allow rich businessmen, wealthy businessmen are regular human beings, they will act in their own interests, and therefore it's a necessary part of government to regulate, to ensure that there's sufficient spending for those millions of people who are not so privileged.
Wow, fantastic. So I think now we would move on to what I call your adventures under the Shagari government. Could you tell us about that?
A fascinating time, as I spoke, is psychologically secure and therefore gives you an opportunity to develop yourself and takes you as a son. I often say that your first boss is either your second father or your last nightmare. I was very fortunate in that my first boss became my second father. It could not have been a more exciting time because 1980, when I returned, we had just had the second oil price increase. The price of oil had moved from $2 to about $13 or $14 in 1973, and then it had moved to about $40 in 1980. The exchange rate between the dollar and the naira was around 1 to 1 at that particular time. When we consider that today it's 470, I guess for lots of young people watching this program, the notion that at one time the dollar was roughly equivalent to the naira must seem very bizarre. But at the time, I think the major issues that we had very much there was one, how do we develop our gas, and how do we ensure that the liquefied natural gas project takes off. We had had one or two failed attempts, and so a lot of my time at that during, and I'm very proud of the part that I played during that time. That's one. The second thing that was important at the time was how do we achieve oil price stability in the marketplace? And it was beforehand, all the oil-producing countries could just produce as much oil as they wanted. We were then in a situation of big oversupply, and therefore we had prices falling. And during that particular time was the first time in which we had to within the oil markets of having to agree quotas. This first started in the early 80s, and I was very proud to be part of that government and putting together. The National Petroleum Corporation was much smaller then than it is now, and in fairness to them at the time, they did complete Kaduna Refinery on time within budget. And while I was there, the beginnings of the launch of the new Port Harcourt refinery also occurred at that particular time. In December the 31st, 1983, we had a coup d'etat, and I still remember that very clearly to Maima, who I later married, and we arrived in Abidjan, and I woke up the next morning to find out that there had been a coup in Nigeria. I was very fortunate not to be in the country because all special assistants, special advisors and ministers, and I was a special assistant, had been asked to report to the nearest police station. And had I been in the country at the time, I would have been in Kirikiri for the next 20 months of my life. So I was very fortunate to have left on that particular day. I was, to my surprise, and as a result of a number of shall we just say, accidents and luck and goodwill from certain friends, I was reappointed Minister of Petroleum, and my second boss was. It was a very strange time because you were in a government in which all your colleagues are in Kirat, and it was a very interesting time and a difficult time. But in that sense, I learned a lot from that because, as I think you yourself, Dele, have learned as well, it's during times of adversity that you learn a lot of lessons. They toughen you, they make you more thoughtful, and they strengthen you if they do not break you. That we did a lot of work, again, on the 4th refinery and making sure that that took off. I stayed on in the government until another coup, the Babangida coup, and I had the opportunity of married. I think I took the decision that, maybe this is a good time for me to leave the government, go into private business, and see how that went. So I retired from the government at the age of about 30 or 31. See what the business world holds for me.
Sir, oil is very, very important to Nigeria.
Yes.
Why is it that oil refinery, just for us to have oil refineries to refine our own oil, has become rocket science?
I don't think you're very right about that. It should not be as difficult as it was. If I'm to try to explain it, I would put it in the following way. One is that over the years, NNPC, I think, has become more and more politicized. That's number one. I think that over the years, we haven't really been able to ensure that a lot of our ablest people who should have been raised should have happened. And I think that over the years, for a lot of people, especially in the political class, they have just regarded it as very much. I sometimes feel sad for a lot of the NNPC officials because they are the quote-unquote the thieves who have been enjoying, whereas in actual fact, in a lot of cases, the political appointees have been. I think that the first big mistake that was made was when a decision was taken at some point, which was that those companies who are responsible for building the refineries usually had responsibility for handling the maintenance of the refineries. And they often and usually virtually ran the refineries with the NNPC officials. I think that when that decision was taken, and it was taken at some point, I think late, that came during the Abacha period. I may be wrong about my timing of it, but when that decision was taken, that they don't refineries to companies that one had never heard about, had no clue what they were doing, and they just failed. And after a while, you could not but begin to believe that maybe there was some nice arrangement between those people who are supposed to be maintaining the refineries and certain individuals who clearly were benefiting from the fact that the money was being voted to maintain refineries or not being maintained. And over the years, they started, their production dropped, capacity dropped, production dropped. And as years went on, you had fewer and fewer people remaining in NNPC who most of them had never built a refinery themselves. Many of them had never even worked in a refinery that was itself working. And therefore, over time, you probably have large sections of the refineries division of the NNPC today. And I suspect that there are many who have never really themselves, as I said, built a refinery to sort out this problem. The honest truth about the matter is that the cumulative experience is no longer there. I think that we Nigerians, we do have a basic problem in running state corporations. We tried it with banks. State banks, we failed. I'm not saying private banks have been fantastic, but I think private banks have certainly done better than state banks have done. And I think that it's going to be very difficult to restore amongst Nigerians a sense that state corporations are to be run efficiently and honestly, and that an appointment to a state corporation is not an opportunity to simply take money out, as we have seen in the hearings of the House or in the recent conflicts of NDDC and other institutions like that.
Yes, sir. So from government, what was your next move?
I think a very good and close friend, Udoma. Our original plan was to set up a law practice together. My wife is a lawyer and a far better qualified and far more able lawyer than myself. So I very wisely altered that plan, and she and Udoma ended up setting up a law firm together, which has turned out to be a truly outstanding law firm. And I decided that I want to try my hand at business. While I was in the government, I had seen that there were certain gaps. And that is that a lot of oil companies, private companies, who wanted to do business with the government of Nigeria often didn't know how to go about it. They didn't know where the opportunities lay. I had experience working in the government, and I had, while at business school, studied a lot of areas in the oil industry. And I said to myself that let me try and establish a business in that sector. And I must say that it was a very exciting time for me. After I think I was there for close to 10 years. Very fortunate to have been paid well, I must say. But after a while, I must say that I did start to get a little bit bored, mainly because in those days, you were very much an advisor, you were a consultant, you were an agent, but you were never really in charge yourself, because at that point in Nigeria's history, it was very much the NNPC and the big international oil companies. This was pre-Mike Adenuga, it was pre-Ocean and Oil, the privatization of the oil marketing companies and the oil producing companies. And so I saw an opportunity in finance, and allowing private people to get into the kinds of areas that were hitherto reserved for the government. I think that President Babangida is often not given sufficient credit, because I think that his abolition of import licenses, his liberalization, his deregulation, and his privatization, I think made a tremendous difference to Nigeria and gave a large number of opportunities to a lot of people today who we hear about today are successful and with us for a period of time. And I think that would have been mired in economy, which I don't think would have been good for Nigeria. My very first venture in finance, I must say, was a big failure. And one of the things I do talk about is the importance of failure. And it went wrong, and I blame myself for a lot of those mistakes. But my second venture, FSDH, was a big success. It was a securities trading company, and it was from FSDH that I then launched the attempt to take over UBA, which I often say made me either famous or infamous, depending on your point of view. And it was when you and I met.
Yes, okay, I was going to say that a lot of people still blame the IBB regime for SAP, and yes, there was riots.
Yes.
So
I think that when you assess any Nigerian leader, you have got to you've got to see it on the background of what what was happening to oil prices at the time. All right? The fact of the matter is that during most of Babangida's regime, the price of oil was at about $8 to $10 a barrel. About 30 of oil, which is 90% of Nigeria's foreign exchange. If it collapses, a government doesn't have that much leeway to maintain the exchange rate. What will inevitably happen at that time is that you will see the Naira being devalued. And I think that, yes, maybe there's some things that Babangida might have done a little bit better, but any government that was there at that time would have had difficulty avoiding austerity during a period at which Nigeria's revenues were cut by at least a third. That different, all right? The oil price at one time was, I think, was about $100, $80. At one time, it went up to as much as $120 to $130 a barrel. Ago, it was close to zero. We're now talking of about 30, and I think that it's important that when that happens, what is going to happen to the exchange rate? Are we going to be able to maintain an exchange rate that is the same exchange rate as when the price was, say, $100, dollars a barrel? At that time, we have to start taking decisions as to what do we spend our money on. Certain things you will not be able to spend your money on that you could before, and you then have to start thinking about how do we attract foreign investment, given that internally we may not have the capital that we require. So I think going back to Babangida, yes, there was suffering during that period. Yes, things were tough, but we have to ask the other question, which is the following: if there was no deregulation, if there had been no liberal, had a government-controlled economy during that period of time, would the economy have been any better? And I would say that I think that the general direction that he took was better, a more effective way. Yes, corruption could and should have been reduced, but the general direction was one that I think was best for Nigeria.
A lot of blistering attacks.
Yes, for me, you see, United Bank of Africa, for me, and the issues that I faced there, in many the jobs for 4,000 people who can continue working. You have bringing staff that have very good skills that you require for much more modern banking, while at the same time understanding that there's some of your existing staff who have not been trained, who have not been recognized in an old order, and who need the opportunity to be trained and need the opportunity to be given an opportunity, to thrive. The ultimate justification for me is the following. United Bank of Africa, at the time when we started, had a stock market valuation of about $15 million in US dollar terms. That was the value of the bank, ascribed by the TCPC, the privatization committee at the time, roughly $15 to $20 million. And I accept that valuation, even though I know that at the time when he took over, it was bankrupt. So it really had a zero value, frankly speaking, but it was 15. Now, at the time when we sold the bank, its valuation in US dollar terms was somewhere between $200 and $250 million. So for me, if you take stewardship of an organization and over a 7 to 10 year period, you manage to multiply its value by somewhere between 10 to 20 times in US dollar terms and put it on a safe footing when it was bankrupt, I think that justifies the very tough and severe action that you took. And when you consider the fact that some of the other banks who were our competitors who did not take these actions, and I look at Union Bank and AfriBank in particular, those banks collapsed and went bankrupt. And so I give this example because I also think that the government of Nigeria as a government also needs to take very tough decisions and very tough action. It's the central bank, whether it's parastatals, whether it's confronting the issue, can the government of Nigeria run on the basis that its recurrent expenditure on salaries is probably, I don't know, somewhere between 80 to 90% of revenues? Is that sustainable? Can you continue to borrow your way out of things? And I think that it's necessary for our government leaders and our senior leaders in the private sector to confront the tough situation we're in, take tough decisions, be unpopular for a period of time, knowing believing that with the right measures that will take the country to a much better situation than we're in right now.
Wow, so fantastic. I think one of the other areas that a lot of people have expressed interest in is the situation at Etisalat.
Yes.
First, why did you go into telecoms? What influenced?
I think that I went into telecoms because I think that telecoms is going to be and I think that if anything, the pandemic is simply going to accelerate that. I think that the mobile phone is going to be a key instrument in development. I think that people can delay it, but whether or not you talk about medicine, education, you talk about finance, telecommunications, and the technology spheres. Substantial changes are going to be needed in those areas, and all of them are going to center around how we deliver far more efficient services at much lower costs to a broad mass of the population using a different network and doing away with the bricks and mortar that has been the basis of those sectors for the last 50 or 60 years.
So what went wrong at Etisalat?
All right. I think that two things went wrong at Etisalat. The first was that The fall in oil prices led to a collapse in the exchange rate. The exchange rate moved from somewhere, I think we were at one time we were about 120, 130 naira to the dollar, to somewhere around, I think it was 250 to 300. Yeah. In addition to that, because the telecoms company had pursued a very to be the most efficient, the highest quality network, and I think all would agree that we did achieve that. It meant that we had borrowed a considerable amount of dollars in order to finance that expansion. Our revenues were in naira. So the drop in oil prices, the collapse in exchange rate meant that we now needed more naira to repay the dollar loans that we had taken. Now, the banks quite rightly wanted a repayment of the loans that they had given. From the point of view of the telecoms company, they felt we've expended a lot of our own equity in this drive. We have paid all our loans up to date. Banks have earned close to $1 billion in interest payments over the years with structuring of the loans. In the banks and between the communications companies, we could not agree on a restructuring plan. Because I think that what happened after that was the worst thing that could happen, which was both the banks and the telecoms companies lost money. The banks rejected the proposals made by the telecoms companies, which they had every right to do, and took the decision that they were going to take over the company themselves, ask the Arab investors to leave, and they were going to run it themselves. Now, my own view is that that was probably a mistake, all right? And that it is very difficult for a set of banks to run a telecoms company. They don't have the expertise to do so. The telecoms company had not met its financial commitments. But I do think that people have learned from the lessons of the mistakes that were made. I noticed that the oil price collapsed again in the last 1 year. The exchange rate has dropped again. And this time round, I've noticed that the Central Bank of Nigeria has come out encouraging a lot of the banks to restructure the loans over a longer period of time, and has given them assurances that they will not have to make the kinds of provisions that they would be expected to make if we had a very harsh implementation of the prudential guidelines. So I think that the similar situation today is being handled much better than it was handled 2 years ago. So I think that is what Seoul, I think, remains in a precarious situation. My view is, honestly and sincerely speaking, is that I think that the banks and Etisalat and the Nigerian shores, we should have come to an agreement. And I think if we'd all come to an agreement on what is to be done, I think we'd all be better off now.
If given the chance, would you still want to go to telecoms?
I never look back. I never look back. I never look back. And I think that my attitude is that, look, you are in different phases of your life, all right? If your question 65 would which I'm very much enjoying the stage of my life of being an academic, all right, doing some business, but very much teaching and doing research. And I genuinely feel that at 65, you're supposed to be encouraging young people who are in their 30s to be making their mark and in a sense, not remaining until you're carried out on a stretcher, so to speak.
I think you'll be able to write a PhD thesis on the Nigerian factor. Could you give us a synopsis of the Nigerian factor?
I would say, I think I can just give you a few glimpses of some of the things I would write about. Well, certainly, you have to talk about the undue influence of government. I think that to cooperate and indulge in much more teamwork, than we do, much better. And in so many areas, I think that there's often an unnecessary battle or a fight to finish, which ends up with everybody losing out. I think that definitely will be there. I think that a section of it will be on how we need to give young people and women more opportunities than they are given right now. And that in particular, we need to recognize that it is young people who have the boldest ideas, who are most adventurous, who are thinking differently, and they need to be given leadership at a much younger age than they are receiving right now. I think there will be a chapter very much on how I believe, and I think that when we're UBA, we succeeded in it, which is that it is quite possible to build companies that are ethnically diverse, because my view is that intelligence is equally spread across races, across religions, people of all ethnic groups to work together well, and we need to do more and more of that. And we shouldn't take the present abuse of federal character to be the last word on diversity in our companies. So those are just a few glimpses of some of the chapters that I intend to write on.
Fantastic, fantastic. At 65, Chairman, you are in semi-retirement. Are you not? Is that not like an advice to leaders in Africa that at 65, no matter who you are, you begin to decline and you must allow others to come up?
All right. I'll answer this question in two ways. Am I saying that everybody over 65 has nothing to offer? No, I'm not saying that. All right? I look at the example of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela emerges. I think he must have been in his 70s when he emerged.
Definitely.
Yes, he emerged in his 70s. He played a very critical role in his country's history. And must be excluded. But I think that Mandela also tells us something as well. Because when you look at the 2 or 3 people who were very close to him, or who were his principal lieutenants at the time, Thabo Mbeki, Cyril Ramaphosa, there were people who were in their 40s and their early 50s. And the fact that after one term, should do. When I look at people, I think that, let's face it, in your 30s and in your 40s, your attitude to life is very much, why not? What can go right? that is your initial approach to things. And you are obviously more daring. You don't see hurdles. But the fact of the matter is that as of necessity, when a person gets to their 50s and their 60s, whereas before when they're saying why not, they're saying why. Right? Whereas before they're talking about what could go right, they are now asking the question, what could go wrong? All right? They are of necessity more cautious, much more risk averse, much more out of tune with the latest thinking and the latest technology. So, I do think that Nigeria, in our government, in our politics, in our businesses, we need many more people in there, because I think that in many senses they are not hampered by a lot of the personal quarrels, the personal envies, the thinking of the 1960s and the 1970s or the 1980s, and they're part of a newer world, and they should be given a chance to make their contribution. I think that share our experience, it is to guide, it is to advise, but I do think that when I look at Barack Obama, I look at Tony Blair, I look at people like Gordon Brown, David Cameron, and you see how young they were. It tells you something about the kind of society that we should have, or Bill Clinton. Yes, in China, we do have a lot of leaders who they've done.
Would you recommend that government should begin to consider more technocrats in power than politicians? It seems the propensity for stealing is forced by what politicians go through before they get power. And two, a lot of them have never managed people and resources. If a man has never managed 1 million and you give him a 10 trillion budget, he's likely to run mental. Don't you think so?
Yes, you've got a good point there. What I would like to say is that, you see, that word technocrat is a word that is often used in Nigeria. Now, I want to break it down. What exactly is a technocrat? Yes, a technocrat is supposed to be a person who has certain technical skills or technocratic skills that he has. And his life and his career have been governed, influenced by applying those technocratic skills. And that's really what you mean by a technocrat. But I must say to you that I find that I've come across a lot of people who behave exactly the same as politicians behave when they get into power. All right? They may have at some point been great engineers. They may have at some point been, bankers, great bankers. They may have at some point have been great accountants. But when they have been on the seat of those people who have been lifelong politicians. So therefore, sometimes I think that the distinction between technocrat as opposed to politician, it's a distinction that doesn't really tell us very much. Rather, I would rather simply say that what Nigeria needs, good and able people who are patriotic, who are honest, who work hard, who are intelligent, who are thoughtful, and who are committed to the country. Some of these people may be lawyers, some may be doctors, some may be politicians, some may be members of the House of Representatives, some may be technology people, and we just pick those. I have come across people that I expected a lot of, and who quote unquote were technocrats. Okay, and I've seen them get into office and commit atrocities while there, and so that's why I don't like to say technocrats as opposed to politicians. I would simply say that let a president of Nigeria pick individuals from all over Nigeria who are able, who are talented, who are honest, and who will work very hard for Nigeria. Power, they show signs of corruption. They need to be fired. They need to be removed, so that the lesson is learned that you can't rest on your quote-unquote technocratic background. You can't rest on the fact that you delivered a state or you delivered a local government in an election, or that you are loyal 20 or 30 years ago, but that instead you will be judged by your performance on the job that you are given by a president or a governor.
Now, you and your wife, Auntie Maima, you've contributed immensely to charitable causes globally. I would want to South Africa. When I was reading about you today, I was really touched.
All right. I must say that it's something that I don't like to talk about, but Dele, you're one of the few people that I can't say no to. I don't like to talk about it because I just feel that there's something about talking about what you have given, talking about what you have done, that sometimes I just feel sounds very boastful, all right? So let's just say I will just talk about some of the contributions Maima and I have tried to make, and I will not give any numbers at all in the discussion. I hope that's a good compromise, all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's okay. I think that in the area of medicine, about the fact that none of us ended up being hardworking doctors like our fathers were, and maybe you can say that we have tried to repay that debt by a certain interest in medicine, and therefore we've supported efforts and research efforts in areas like infertility, in blood banking, especially during the period when HIV was very rife, and in which there was a lot of transmission of HIV via blood that had not been screened for HIV. So I think we did a lot of work in that particular area. A lot of work also in areas like artificial insemination, and that was again allied to the work related to the stuff on infertility, which is just beginning to understand the things that childless people go through in this country, and seeing what could be done in helping solve some of those problems. So efforts in gynecology is something that Maima and I have been very much involved in and associated with, and we also, in our own quiet way as well, also try to make efforts in equipping and supporting medical efforts in responding to the present COVID pandemic as well. Then I think we both have been very much blessed with an education that within been a very privileged education. And therefore, we have both seen the impact that education has had in our lives. And in that sense, we have both very much wanted to ensure that others benefit from that education, that kind of education. So at both King's College and at at Chimota, at the University of Ghana, at the United World Colleges, which I went to myself, at the African Leadership Academy, at Oxford University, at Harvard Law School, at the Africa Center for Harvard University, at Yale. We have always made contributions. Sometimes it has been to research. Sometimes it has been to physical construction. Sometimes it has been to scholarships. But we've always tried to make contributions for African. I think these days, the area that I'm very interested in getting involved in, and in which a lot of my teaching and research is going to be involved in, it is in the relationship between knowledge and action. And I talk about knowledge and action because I think that one of the central problems that I think a lot of our governments have is that a lot of decisions that are taken, especially in government, are decisions that are taken without the necessary research, the necessary thinking, the necessary analysis being done as to what is the problem, how is it best solved, what policies should be put in place, how is it best executed, and one of the things that I'm fascinated by is how do we ensure that decision makers have the benefits of the best information, the best research, the best analysis that is available, and how do we collapse that relationship between knowledge and power? Because the most sophisticated and the most successful countries in the world have been those country economic policies that have doubled standards of living for millions of people.
Well, can you tell us how Old Boys Connections have helped?
Old Boys Connections.
Old Boy Connections have helped in your trajectory.
Yes.
And if you are thinking of doing an autobiography or a biography, we must have a book from you very soon, Chairman.
Yes. All right. Have Old Boys Connections worked? Of course, they have worked. They have been very helpful, without a shadow of a doubt. Without people I had met in Corona School, King's College, Lagos, United World College. So, for example, the Etisalat investment was an investment of between $1 to $2 billion. That investment started with a relationship I had with a schoolmate of mine at sixth form at United World College, who also became a classmate at Harvard Business School. And it was the trust and the relationship that we had that led to $2 billion worth of investment of United Arab Emirates in Nigeria. I don't think there's been any substantial Middle Eastern investment in Nigeria since that particular time. Anyway, nowhere near that kind of amount of money. So do these relationships matter? They matter a lot. But of course, they have to be positive relationships in the sense that you mustn't go to a school and people remember you from school as a person that you should never do business with. People, of course, have to remember you fondly. So the Old Boys Network does help. And then the second question about a biography, an autobiography. Yes, I do intend to write. I want to write a book that is frank and says things as they are, and therefore maybe I should have 2 volumes. One volume that describes what happened and what my experiences were, and it should be published while I'm alive. And maybe there's a second book which says things that maybe shouldn't be said and maybe should be published after I pass away.
That's interesting. On this note, Chairman, I must say a very, very big thank you. I cannot thank you enough, and my warmest regards to your family. Definitely, we will have to invite you again at some point because this should be like a lecture series. Our young ones need a lot of information about so many things, and because of the collapse of education, it has become difficult for them to learn these things locally, except they go to privileged schools, which most of us cannot afford. So thank you so much, sir. And
if I can say up to you, I would also like to thank you for the honor of inviting me over, which has been a pleasure. I would like to spirit. That is that you have kept going, and at each time you've surprised people. I think Ovation was a first in the country, and I truly respect the fact that you started a magazine where there was nothing at all similar to it within our country, and I think Ovation is something that has surpassed its equivalent in England, Hello and OK, and it became something that everybody wanted to appear in. And the thing that I very much admired about you is that you've been able to, on the one hand, you've been able to do a society magazine, all right, that looks at us, and on the other hand, I can pick up the newspaper and read you on a Sunday discussing what the Buhari government should be doing, making a commentary on what Obasanjo is up to, discussing, the economics of our country, and you are able to do both. And in both cases, I learned a lot from you. So I just want to let you know that as you are waiting for my memoirs, I shall be looking regularly to your articles and being guided by some of the very useful and fruitful things that you say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman, and good night. Thank you.
Good night.
I'll be joining